The danger that we have today in the U.S. is that we depend on systems for resources rather than relationships. And we're dealing with a lot of where our food comes from. We have zero relationship with any of those sources, and so they're much, much more vulnerable than if we were getting them from family, from what we did ourselves through the plants and animals we have a personal relationship with and that we take care of, or through neighbors and friends and family that produce stuff that we can get it from as well. And so those different things, we have our own hands, family, community, and I'd say church first, and then others, as well, prioritize the people, other believers. And then we also have like trade and commerce from import from other places. Minimally, we want to be able to meet our own needs with up here. So up here has to be like essentials. Needs to be as close to this end of the spectrum as possible. You need to at least have what you can survive on coming from your own self and your own family. Not that you're going to have everything you need, but you could at least survive on what you're producing. It's all you had was sweet potatoes, and you had rainwater, and you had a few chickens, and that's all you had left, and all these other sources were cut off, then hey, you wouldn't be eating fancy, but you'd be surviving. And then further down here, you get to more like luxury items that are really nice to have that you can import from other places. And it's not wrong to do that, but you really don't want to be importing your essentials from places that you'd have no relationship, very little relationship with. So try to only depend on those things that you basically have shallow to no relationship with. Only try to trade things with them that you are not necessities of life, that you're not dependent on them for the necessities of life, because you have a whole lot less impact and influence because you don't have a relationship with them. But it doesn't mean that it's bad to buy things from them. Just make sure it's not something you're dependent on. So in terms of thinking about what how you're going to go about meeting your needs, it's great to do an exercise of saying, if I couldn't go to the store or to town like we would normally get most things for 6 months, how would I survive? How would I feed myself? How would I get water? How would I cook my food? How would I get fuel? How would I wash my clothes? How would we, take care of personal hygiene? How would we do all those things? And write down the areas that you say, oh, that's great. Or that one's like, I really have no clue how I would do that. And sometimes it's as simple as, oh, well, I would literally be cooking out over a campfire outside if I didn't have electricity tomorrow. All I have to do is buy a $30 grill. And I would not be cooking on the ground. I would be cooking in a grill underneath the porch. And that would be pretty simple. Or, hey, if we just got some 5-gallon buckets with some toilet seats on them and sawdust, then we wouldn't be digging holes outside. Instead. So because right now there's little bitty steps you can do to be able to meet needs that you're dependent on outside inputs like electricity for, that very simple decisions could allow you to do that. In other countries they do it all the time because they're forced to constantly think about this because they don't have reliable imports of food or reliable imports of electricity, external electricity. So they're forced to have kind of a scale of living where like, hey, they have electricity, they enjoy it, or food they can buy, but when they don't, they also know what to do as well. We don't know what to do typically without those things. And so it's a good exercise to go through, how would I, where would I get those things from? What things, make a list of what things you could realistically supply yourself, and then what things you couldn't, and try to identify where you would then source them from. And if it's something that, like salt, that you literally can't get in your area, might not be a bad idea then to, invest in some salt that you can make sure you have on hand, so that if the place, a lot of these, if salt is coming from an area that you don't have a direct relationship with, then the dependency on that is, not something that you should rely on. And if you can create a buffer of time that you can do without that, then you'll be in a much better place on your homestead to be able to thrive despite the changes that inevitably come throughout history. But start simple with the things that you want to do. Start with the basics. First of all, water is a really important one to know how you're going to do it. Water is really important. And then your basic food and ability to prepare it. Things like in your home you have basic household functions of how do you wash your clothes, how do you get light, and if you can identify like your actual house itself and what type of needs it has for you to be able to function inside your house. Most houses today and a lot of subdivisions without electricity, they wouldn't be livable. And it's not that using electricity or some of these outside inputs are bad, it's just unadvisable to be dependent on them because you have very little control over whether they're there or not. So many third world countries would thrive much better when those things are taken away because they're used to not depending on them than we who can't do without them. So ideally set up your homestead where if the external things that we're used to having available, that if they aren't there, then we can do without them if we need to. Doesn't mean that you have to completely not use any of them. Just try to decrease your dependency where you can think, if I didn't have them for 6 months, could I survive without literally going back to the Stone Age? And just order a few simple tools that allow me to do that without it. Then start simple and work your way up. Don't try to do everything at once because you will get overwhelmed and you won't do things well. Maintain your standards in seeking to source more of your essentials from those sources that God provides for us through, and prioritize the ones that you have relationships with. Does that make any sense? Help us kind of just make those decisions without it being this black and white. You're totally self-sufficient, or you just live in the system. I think this is what God values as relationships. So we want to say that those are important.